Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We are talking about the raj'ah, so let's continue with a few more issues. What happens in the case where there's a dispute? The wife who is divorced, she says that her iddah period has finished. And the husband, he says, no, your iddah period has not finished. So in this dispute, whose word do we take? An opinion from the Hanabila is that if it is possible for her iddah period to finish in this particular time period, then we accept her word for it. Because the point is we entrust her to count her iddah period. And what the Hanabila scholars say is that the minimum period for a woman to have 3 menstrual cycles is 29 days. And the reason for this is because they say that the minimum period of the menstrual cycle is a day and a night, and the minimum period in between the menstrual cycle is 13 days, because they say this is the minimum that we know of. So which basically means that if we want 3 menstrual cycles, then the minimum time period here would be 29 days, because she menstruates, that will be a day and a night, then 13 days in between, and then she menstruates again, and then 13 days in between, and then she menstruates again. So if you add all of that up, it comes to 29 days. So upon this opinion of the Hanabila, they say that if she claims after 29 days that she has finished her iddah period and that she is now completely separated from the husband, then we would take her word for it, because it is possible in this time period for her to finish their iddah period. It could also be that she finishes her iddah period by giving birth if she was pregnant. Well, what's the ruling on that? Is it any baby she gives birth to, then her iddah would be finished? The answer is no. She has to give birth to a baby who looks like a human being, so he has the features of a human. So if it is anything less than that, then her iddah period does not finish, because she hasn't actually given birth to a human being. Because when the baby or the embryo is in the womb, then it is firstly a nutfah, which is a drop of blood or congealed liquid, and then it is an alaqa, which is a piece of flesh which clings on to the womb, but then it becomes a mudgha. Now the mudgha, which is this piece of flesh, is divided into 2 categories. The mudgha mukhallaqa, which is the created or the fashioned mudgha, and this looks like a human being, so it has the features of a human. And then we have the mudgha ghayru mukhallaqa, the mudgha which is not fashioned in a human being. And so the minimum time period, which we know from the hadith, that the embryo turns into a mudgha would be at 81 days. Because for 40 days it is a nutfah, for the next 40 it is an alaqa, and then it becomes a mudgha. So after 80 days have passed, it becomes a mudgha. So then, we have to then check if she gives birth after 80 days, is it mukhallaqa or is it not mukhallaqa? If it is mukhallaqa, so it has the features of a human, then yes, she has given birth and her iddah period has finished. If it is not mukhallaqa, or if she gives birth before 81 days, then it does not hold true that her iddah period has finished, because she hasn't officially given birth to anything valid, such that we could say that her iddah period has finished. And if a woman gives birth before 81 days, or to something which does not look like a human being, so it's not fashioned in that form, then any bleeding which comes after that birth is not nifas. Nifas is only after a valid birth, which basically means that this is just an abnormal type of bleeding, much like the istihada. So it means she can pray and fast in that particular bleeding, but she cannot do that in the nifas. So you can see the difference of ruling here. And the reason why we would accept her statement is because Allah Jalla wa'ala has made this woman into an ameen, into somebody who is trusted. And when we have somebody who is an ameen, then we accept his word. Otherwise, there is no point in making this person an ameen in the first place. The evidence that Allah has made her into an ameen, where He says in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَلَا يَحِلُّ لَهُنَّ أَن يَكْتُمْنَ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ فِي أَرْحَامِهِنَّ. And it is not halal for them to conceal what Allah has created in their wombs. So what we take from this ayah is that if the woman is pregnant and she says, no, I'm not pregnant actually, and my iddah has finished, because she does not want to continue on with this long iddah of the pregnancy, then the point here is that we would accept her statement and we would say, okay, your iddah is finished, you're free to remarry. Of course, what she's doing is not halal, but we would have to accept it because it's her word and we accept her word. And the point is, if it was the case that we do not accept her word, then there would be no point in Allah Jalla wa Ala ordering the women to not to conceal what is in their womb. Because the point is, if we're not going to accept their word anyway, then what does it matter if they tell us that they are pregnant or not? But the point is, it matters. This is why Allah is telling them, do not conceal what is in your womb. Why? Because your word is going to be accepted, so do not lie to us. But somebody might argue back here. He might say, no, why should we accept the statement of the woman? Because the point is that the woman is the claimant here. She is claiming that the iddah has finished, and we know that the asl is that the iddah has not finished. So anyone who makes a claim against the asl needs to provide evidence. And we cannot just take his claim on face value. But the answer here is that in this case we have specific evidence that her statement is to be taken and accepted. And the evidence we have given is from the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. But also we can add and say that the reason for this separation is the husband because he has divorced the wife. The point is, if he did not divorce the wife, then we would not be in this situation of accepting or rejecting her statement. And so, because the husband is the cause of this separation, the consequences of this separation must be against him. So in other words, we don't accept the statement of the husband, we accept the statement of the wife. So just going back to the issue where she is not pregnant and she's claiming that the iddah has finished, so we're talking about the 3 menstruation cycles here. According to the Hanabila scholars, if she makes this claim in 29 days or less, then her claim is not to be heard because we know it's impossible that her iddah has finished. They say if she makes the claim after 30 days, then they say this is possible, but we would require evidence because it is rare. Though it is possible, but it's rare, so we require some testimony. And they say the third scenario is if she claims that her iddah has finished in a normal time period, so in a time period where the iddah of most women is expected to finish, so this is likely to be 3 months, then they say that her claim is to be accepted without any evidence, because she is an ameen. So they give 3 scenarios here. One scenario, if it's 29 days or less, in this case her claim is not even heard by the court. Then the second scenario, if it is 30 days or over, but still it is not a long time, so this is rare, though possible. So they say we will hear your claim, but you have to provide evidence. And then the third scenario is a normal time period where you would expect most women to finish 3 menstrual cycles, which would be 3 months. In this case, no evidence is needed, and just her claim alone is accepted. In any case, in a real life scenario, the Qadi may not be following the Hanabila opinion, so he would have to judge in accordance with what is apparent. What about if we reverse the situation? The husband now claims that she has finished the iddah period, but she says no, she has not finished it. We say that the answer is the same, we accept her statement because she is the ameen. And of course here we have the asl, which is that the iddah has not finished unless you provide evidence. So if the husband is claiming that the iddah is finished, then he has to provide evidence. What about this situation? If the wife says that my iddah has finished, but then the husband claims, no, but I took you back, made the raj'ah, before your iddah finished. So this is the dispute, and nobody has any evidence. So whose claim do we accept? We accept the claim of the woman. Because the point is, we accept her statement when it comes to the iddah finishing, so there's no problem there. As for the husband saying that I took you back before the iddah, then we say that the asl is that you did not take her back, unless you can provide evidence, because you are making this claim that you took her back. And your claim cannot be accepted unless if it is backed up with evidence. And it makes no difference who says it first. So if the husband says first, I took you back before the iddah finishes, but then the wife says, no, my iddah finished before you took me back, or if it's the other way around, the wife begins by saying, my iddah has finished, and then the husband says, no, but I took you back before your iddah finished. So in both of these situations, then, we accept the statement of the wife if the husband cannot provide evidence to the contrary. So those were some issues then pertaining to the raj'ah. Let us now move on to talking about when the husband uses up all 3 of his divorces. We've mentioned the basic ruling about this before, is that when he uses up all 3 of his divorces, then the woman is not allowed to marry him until she consummates marriage with another man. As Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا فَلَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ مِن بَعْدُ حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرَهُ. Then when he divorces her, meaning completely is separated from her, the baynunatun kubra, which is when he uses up the 3 divorces, then she's not halal for him after that until she marries another husband. Some scholars have said that if she wants to get back with him after 3 divorces, all she has to do is to marry another man, and then if that ends in a divorce, she can get back to the first husband, even if she does not consummate marriage with the second husband. And they say, because the ayah simply says, حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرَهُ, until she marries another man. And marriage takes place simply with the contract. It doesn't take place with the sexual intercourse, that's just simply the consummation of the marriage. So the nikah takes place just by merely the contract. Similarly, where Allah Jalla wa Ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا نَكَحْتُمُ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ طَلَّقْتُمُوهُنَّ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ تَمَسُّوهُنَّ فَمَا لَكُمْ عَلَيْهِنَّ مِنْ عِدَّةٍ تَعْتَدُّونَهَا. O you believe, when you marry believing women and then you divorce them without touching them, meaning having intercourse with them, then they do not have to observe an iddah period for you. So look at how Allah uses the word nikah when He says nakahtum, and it does not include the sexual intercourse, so it does not include the consummation of the marriage. So the nikah simply takes place by merely the contract. However, this is where the ahadith are so vital, because otherwise this opinion seems very reasonable. Yes, she just has to marry another man without consummating, and if that marriage ends up in a divorce, then she can marry the first husband again. But we have information from the hadith which tells us something different. It tells us that she has to consummate this second marriage, and that just the nikah contract itself is not good enough. And the hadith which is found in the Sahihain, where the wife of Rifa'a was divorced thrice, and then she married a man called Abdurrahman, and she did not want to stay with him because she felt that Abdurrahman was not satisfying her sexually, so he did not have any sexual strength, if you like. So she wanted to get back with Rifa'a, and the Prophet told her, لا حتى يذوق عسيلتك وتذوقي عسيلته. No, until he tastes your sweetness and you taste his sweetness. Usayla is like a little honey, and it is referring to sexual intercourse. So that's the evidence, and it cannot be argued against. We can also argue using some reason. We can simply say, look, if the second husband has intercourse with her, then he is more likely to desire and keep her now that he's tasted her sweetness, or the usayla, which is the little honey. So in other words, he'll be more likely to keep her and for this to be a genuine marriage. On the other hand, if we say no, the intercourse is not a condition, then what would happen is that we would be encouraging the tahleel, which is simply when a man would marry this woman in order to make it halal for the first husband. Some scholars would say that the word nikah means to have intercourse. So when Allah says حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرَهُ, until she makes nikah with another husband, then this means has sexual intercourse, because nikah means sexual intercourse in the language. Other scholars argue back. They say, no, nikah is when a man has intercourse with a woman in the language. It is not when the woman is the doer or the active participle. So nikah in the language meaning having sexual intercourse means when a man specifically is doing the verb. So he's the active participle. So a woman does not have nikah with a man, meaning to say she does not have intercourse with a man. Rather it is the man who has nikah with the woman. This is if you take the word nikah in the linguistic sense. So the man needs to be the active participle, the woman is the passive participle. If you're going to say that nikah means sexual intercourse, which it does in the language. But in the ayah, Allah Jalla wa Ala is talking about the woman being the active participle because she is performing the verb, which is the nikah. So we have to take the word nikah not to mean sexual intercourse, because the woman cannot be the active participle here. So the only thing which is left now is the word nikah in the technical Shar'i sense, which is the marriage contract. Another question is, why does Allah use the word zawjan, which means husband? So how do you marry a husband? Surely you marry a man who will then become your husband, isn't it? So why didn't Allah say حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ رَجُلًا غَيْرَهُ, until she makes nikah with a man other than him, meaning other than the first husband. So we say that zawjan here could mean a man who is going to become the husband, and this is something which you can find in the Quran, as in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, where one of the fellow inmates of Yusuf said, Inni arani a'siru khamra, I see myself squeezing wine or khamr. Well, the point is, he's not squeezing wine. You cannot squeeze wine. You cannot squeeze khamr. It's a drink. You're squeezing the grapes. So he's actually squeezing the grapes which will become khamr. So it's using the word with respect to what it will become, not what it is now. And it's a similar thing here. When Allah uses the word zawjan, he's not a zawj now, but he will become a zawj. So we say there is no doubt, if we combine this ayah with the hadith, then it has to be a valid nikah contract and a consummated valid nikah contract. And when we talk about consummation, then we simply mean that penetration must take place in the front passage. So it's not even the case that he has to complete the actual act, rather just the penetration is enough. Or we can say that is the minimum which has to be done, because that's the minimum in which it holds true that he has tasted her sweetness, and vice versa. And then some scholars say, no, it is a condition that he has to ejaculate, because this is the full tasting of the sweetness. But the majority hold the first opinion. But they all say that sexual excitement needs to take place, so the man does need to experience an erection. And just on this topic of the word usayla, which means a little honey, there are some people who take from this the concept of the shahrul asal, the month of the honey, basically translated to honeymoon, when a couple get married and they go off on a holiday, a honeymoon. Now this concept comes from the kuffar. There is no such concept here in Islam. Some Muslims try to Islamify this concept by going on an umrah. So if you get married newly, and instead of going off on some sort of sunny resort, you go off to umrah. So you're performing this act of worship then. Well, the umrah in and of itself obviously is something praiseworthy, and it expiates your sins in between each umrah, as the well-known hadith goes. But the problem with that is, if we begin to say yes, do that and encourage it, then as time goes on, what do we expect to happen? Well, as time goes on, knowledge decreases, people become more ignorant, and these are of course signs of Qiyamah, of course. Well, the problem with that is people will start to think that Umrah is something which is sunnah to perform after you get married, and this is an adulteration of the sunnah, because there is no such concept in the sunnah. And we need to stress something important here, that this consummation of the marriage with the second husband needs to be in a valid nikah contract. So if the nikah contract turns out to be invalid, and he had consummated marriage with her, meaning the second husband had consummated marriage with her, then she does not become halal for the first husband. It needs to be a consummation of marriage in a valid nikah contract, not an invalid one. So the second husband, let's say, marries this woman, and then it turns out that they're in fact brothers and sisters from breastfeeding, so the same woman breastfed them. So of course this is an invalid nikah contract, and immediately they have to be separated. Now if they consummated marriage, this still does not make her halal for the first husband. Another example could be that she marries this second man after the first husband divorced her thrice, and the wali of the woman in this second marriage contract is her grandfather from the mother's side, so her mother's father. And so they conduct the nikah contract and they consummate the marriage, and the marriage ends up in a divorce. Now, is this woman halal for the first husband? The answer is no, because this nikah contract is in fact invalid because of the absence of a wali, because the wali cannot be a male who is related to the woman solely from the mother's side. It has to be a male who is from the asaba, and the asaba is the male who is related to the woman through the father. What about if the second husband has intercourse with her, a haram intercourse? For example, the first husband divorces her thrice and she is pregnant, and then when she delivers the load, she finishes the iddah period. Now she's in a state of nifas. We know she is allowed to get married in a state of nifas, but not allowed to have intercourse. Likewise with the hayd, she's not allowed to have intercourse in the nifas nor the hayd. So she can get married in the nifas period. Now this husband, the second one, has intercourse with her in the nifas period. This is a haram intercourse. Or for example, let's say she's in a state of ihram during the hajj or the umrah. Of course she's not allowed to have intercourse, but if she does so, it is haram intercourse. Likewise, if she is in a fard fasting, it's haram to have intercourse during that. So if intercourse takes place in one of these scenarios, a haram intercourse, then an opinion of the scholars is that she does not become halal for the first husband if this marriage ends up in a divorce, because this consummation of the marriage was done in a haram way. Because the intercourse during the hayd or the nifas or the ihram or the siyam fard is haram. They say it has to be a halal type of intercourse with the wife. The second opinion on this issue is that even in these cases where the intercourse is haram, but she still becomes halal for the first husband if that second marriage ends up in a divorce, because it holds true that they tasted each other's sweetness, even if it was in a haram fashion. Because the hadith in which the Prophet says, until he tastes your sweetness and you taste his, it includes both the haram type of intercourse and the halal type. So even though it is haram, but it is still effective. Much like, for example, if you usurp land and you pray on this land, your prayer is still correct, but you are committing a sin in you usurping this land. So the sin and the correctness of the prayer, they are from different directions. So they say that it is not like committing zina, which is an invalid type of sexual intercourse. So if the husband has intercourse with his wife in ihram, this is clearly haram, but if she was to become pregnant from this, then we do attribute the child to the husband, because it's not like he committed zina. So the intercourse is still valid. Similarly, for example, let's say the woman has to pray and there's only a very short time left before the time of the prayer finishes, but the husband has intercourse with her. This is haram for her to do because it means she will be missing out on the prayer in its proper time. So clearly the intercourse is haram, without doubt, even though they are husband and wife. But do we now say because this intercourse is haram, it does not make her halal for the first husband if this marriage ends up in a divorce? The answer is no, it makes her halal for the first husband, even though the intercourse is haram, because it still holds true that they have tasted each other's sweetness. And then besides, the intercourse is not an act of worship such that we should say that it is not valid if it is haram. So it appears that the second opinion is a lot more flexible and balanced, but the first opinion is understandable. They are very strict. It must be a lawful sexual intercourse. Then Al-Hafiz said, Babul Eelaa, the chapter of Al-Eelaa. Al-Eelaa in the language means to swear an oath. In the technical terminology, it is when the husband, who has the physical ability to have intercourse with his wife, takes an oath not to have intercourse with her. And this oath which he takes is taken by Allah or one of his names and attributes. The ulama say that the conditions of Al-Eelaa to be valid are 4 conditions. Number 1, that he takes an oath that he will not have intercourse with her in the front passage. We emphasize front passage because if he takes an oath not to have intercourse in the back passage, well then that's haram anyway, so that's invalid and ineffective. So it doesn't really hold any water. We're talking about the front passage. It's taken to be the front passage, because this is the halal type of intercourse. So the point is, if he leaves off having intercourse with the wife without making an oath, then this is not al-Eelaa. The Eelaa is the oath which he needs to make. Condition number 2, that when he takes this oath, it needs to be by Allah or by one of his names and attributes. Otherwise, this oath is not valid. And anyone who takes an oath by other than Allah, then he has committed shirk, and this is minor shirk. The third condition, some scholars say that this oath needs to be that he will not have intercourse with her for more than 4 months. Or, for example, he hinges him not having intercourse with the wife on something which is likely to take more than 4 months. However, we could argue back by saying that al-Eelaa takes place simply by virtue of the fact that he has taken an oath not to have intercourse with the wife, and the time period does not actually matter. And the fourth condition, they say that it needs to be from somebody who is capable of having intercourse with the wife. So if the husband is naturally incapable, then whether he takes an oath or not doesn't make a difference. It is invalid because he is not capable of having intercourse in the very first place. So his oath really holds no meaning. Hadith number 944. وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت: آل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من نسائه وحرم فجعل الحلال حراما وجعل لليمين كفارة. رواه الترمذي ورواته ثقات. From Aisha, she says that the Prophet took an oath against his wives and he made it haram for himself. So he made the halal haram upon himself, and for this oath he gave the kafara. As for the grading of this hadith, then the ulama say what is correct is that this narration is mursal as a statement of a Sha'bi quoting from the Prophet. And what al-Eelaa means here, which obviously means to take an oath as we said before, but the Eelaa here is the Prophet taking an oath not to enter upon his wives for 1 whole month. And the Eelaa here is not necessarily leaving off the sexual intercourse. So he did not mention intercourse when he took the oath. Rather, he took the oath not to enter upon his wives for a period of 1 whole month. As for this idea of him making haram what is halal, then what is referred to here, according to the correct opinion, is what we find in Surah At-Tahrim, where the Prophet made honey haram for himself. Because Aisha and Hafsa were jealous that he would drink honey at the house of one of the wives, and they didn't like that because of jealousy, so they told him that whatever you're drinking there, it gives you a horrible stench. So the Prophet made honey haram for himself. So he said, I will not drink honey anymore. So this narration is referring to 2 different scenarios. We say the ruling on al-Eelaa is that it is permissible on 2 conditions. Firstly, that there must be a need. So for example, a husband may not be pleased with the attitude his wife is giving him, so he takes an oath not to have intercourse with her. We have already said that one of the options the man can take is to abandon his wife, in terms of speech, in terms of where he sleeps, in terms of eating with her. He can abandon her. And this is what the Prophet did. He abandoned his wives because he was not pleased with their attitude when they were making materialistic demands from the Prophet. And so this is not fitting for believing women. So the Prophet decided to give them this ta'zir, or this exemplary punishment, by not entering in upon them and being in privacy with them. So basically he abandoned them. So if this is the case, then it's definitely permissible for a man to take an oath not to have intercourse with the wife or not to enter into privacy with the wife, if it is for a valid reason, such as disciplining the wife. But also the second condition needs to be that this oath must not be for more than 4 months. Because the point here is that if these conditions are not met, so for example you're doing this without a valid reason, or you're doing it for more than 4 months, then you will be depriving the wife of her rights. And so clearly this is oppression. As for this idea of making honey haram for yourself, then this could be divided up into categories. We can say that if somebody says that honey is haram for me, or just any permissible item is haram for me, just as a news item, then of course we say this is a lie and there's nothing more to it. We just tell him, stop lying, you're talking rubbish. If he intends thereby a shar'i ruling, so in other words, he's making halal what is haram or haram what is halal, then what he's doing now is that he's giving a ruling in opposition to what Allah has given, and this is shirk. Allah Jalla wa Ala blames the scholars of the Yahud and the Nasara of committing this shirk, where he says, اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله والمسيح ابن مريم. And in the narration it says that the way they took these rabbis and priests as lords besides Allah is because these rabbis and priests made halal what Allah made haram, and they made haram what Allah made halal, and the others followed them in this ruling. And so if you do this, you are committing shirk, because halal and haram is completely in the hands of Allah Jalla wa Ala, no one else. So if somebody tries to share with Allah in this status or this station of saying what is halal and haram, then this is shirk. Or his intention could be that he's saying this to keep away from this permissible item. Just as the Prophet did here, he wanted to keep away from the honey. He was not saying that honey is haram, and if you drink honey, then you are worthy of punishment. He did not mean this. He just meant to keep away from honey. So now if this is the case, then this takes the ruling of an oath. So if you're going to now drink honey, you have to expiate the oath. If a man says to his wife, if you do such and such, then you are divorced, then majority of the scholars say that this will count as a divorce if the wife does such and such. But the other opinion is that if he intends thereby just to prevent the wife from doing such and such, so this is a type of threat he's giving her, that you will be divorced, but he does not intend the divorce per se, then this is not a divorce, even if she does that action. But what these scholars say is that this takes the ruling of an oath, and he has to make an expiation for this oath. So if the wife goes on to do what he took an oath that she mustn't do, then she's not divorced, but he has to offer the kafara. And majority of the scholars say no, if the wife does that, then she's divorced. But we favor the other opinion of the minority of the scholars because your deeds are by your intention, so we should not take the husband to account for that which he did not intend. Likewise, if he takes a vow against himself, not intending the vow per se, but he's intending to prevent himself from doing something. So for example, he really does not want to speak to Zayd, and he says, for Allah, against me there is another, or there is a vow that if I speak to Zayd, I will fast for 1 whole month. He does not intend another per se, but rather he intends just to refrain from speaking to Zayd. So he wants to impose upon himself not to speak to Zayd. This is the intention. It is not to implement the vow per se. So it's not like saying, if Allah makes me pass these exams, then I will owe Allah fasting of 1 month. Because here he is intending the vow. So it's like he wants to make a trade-off. If Allah gives me success in my exams, I will fast 1 month for Allah. So this is intending a vow in and of itself. But here, he does not intend the vow. He intends just to refrain from speaking to Zayd. So he's really emphasizing this matter. Then again, what we say here is that we go by his intention, and we say that if he speaks to Zayd, he does not need to fast for 1 month. Rather, we take this as a yameen, or as an oath, for which he must offer the kafara for breaking the oath. So the point is, if this ruling applies to this scenario, where the man takes a vow that he will not speak to Zayd, then it should even more so apply to the divorce case, because the point is that Allah does not want the divorce to take place. So we should say that it should apply even more so to a divorce case. Hadith 945 وعن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال إذا مضت 4 أشهر وقف المولي حتى يطلق ولا يقع الطلاق حتى يطلق أخرجه البخاري. From Ibn Umar, he says that if 4 months pass, then the Muli, the one who makes the Eelaa, in other words the husband who took the oath not to have intercourse with his wife, he needs to be stopped until he divorces the wife. And Ibn Umar says that no divorce takes place until the husband actually pronounces the divorce. Al-Bukhari reported it. So we say, if the man takes an oath not to have intercourse with the wife, if 4 months pass, then we have to give the man a choice. Either you have intercourse, if the wife demands it, or you must divorce the wife. If he refuses to divorce, we have to force him to divorce. If still he refuses, the qadi can dissolve the marriage. Because the problem here is that now, after 4 months, he's taking the rights of the wife away. And this is clearly not fair on the wife. Either he has intercourse with her and gives her her rights, or he divorces her and allows her to marry another man. But for a period of less than 4 months, if the man has a valid reason to make Eelaa, for example to discipline the wife because he wants to abandon her, then this is perfectly permissible, as we said before, and we even have an example here with the Prophet ﷺ. If he took an oath not to have intercourse with a wife for, let's say, 5 months, and he decides to change his mind and have intercourse with the wife before 4 months have passed, in other words, before the time where he will be forced to have intercourse or divorce, so if he changes his mind, then he has to offer the kafara for breaking the oath, and this would be better for him. Just as the Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ حَلَفَ عَلَى يَمِينٍ فَرَأَى غَيْرَهَا خَيْرًا مِنْهَا فَلْيَأْتِ الَّتِي هِيَ خَيْرٌ وَلْيُكَفِّرْ عَنْ يَمِينِهِ. If one of you takes an oath, and then he sees something better than that oath which he took, then let him go to that which is better, and offer the expiation for breaking the oath. If he returns back to the wife after 4 months have passed, then there is no kafara for him. As when it comes to Eelaa, the key time period is 4 months. Any oath to keep away from the wife for more than 4 months means that if you return to her before 4 months, you have to offer the kafara. If you return to her after the 4 months, then you don't have to offer the kafara. So the 4 months is the crucial time period here. As for the kafara for breaking the oath, then it is as Allah Jalla wa Ala says in the Quran, to feed 10 poor people from the average of what you feed your family, or to clothe them, or to free a servant, and this is a believing servant. And if you cannot do any of these three, then it would be to fast 3 days. And these are 3 consecutive days. Hadith 946 وعن سليمان بن يسار رضي الله عنه قال أدركت 17 رجلا من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كلهم يقفون المولي رواه الشافعي. From Sulaiman ibn Yasar, he says that I met more than 10 men from the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, and all of them would stop the muli. This narration is sahih. So we find then that this narration is in agreement with the narration of Ibn Umar, that the divorce does not take place until the husband pronounces the divorce. So what happens is that when 4 months pass, we do not say that automatically the husband and wife are separated. No, rather we need to take hold of the husband and we say, either you have intercourse with the wife because she is demanding this and this is her right, or you divorce her. We do not impose the divorce forcefully on the husband. No, rather he has to pronounce the divorce. So we have to actually give him this choice to pronounce the divorce. If then he refuses to pronounce it, then the qadi does have the right to dissolve the marriage in order to preserve the rights of the wife. Hadith 947 وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال كان إيلاء الجاهلية السنة والسنتين فوقت الله 4 أشهر فإن كان أقل من 4 أشهر فليس بإيلاء أخرجه البيهقي. From Ibn Abbas, he says that the Eelaa of the Jahiliyyah would be for 1 or 2 years. So in other words, the husband can take an oath not to have intercourse with the wife and to abandon the wife for 1 or 2 years. So Allah gave this Eelaa a time limit of 4 months. So if it is less than 4 months, then it is not Eelaa. This narration is Hasan, as graded by some of the muhaddithin. So in this narration we have some more information that the Eelaa of the Jahiliyyah would be lasting for 1 or 2 years, and this is far too long. So Allah Jalla wa Ala gives a time limit here. So the time limit is of course 4 months, and if after these 4 months the wife demands that the husband should have intercourse with her, or at least then divorce her, so she can have a relationship with another man, then this must take place. And we say that after 4 months, the husband has to be forced to divorce the wife if the wife wants the husband to return. If it be the case that the husband physically is unable to have intercourse because of some medical condition, then in this case the divorce does not occur, neither is the marriage dissolved. Rather, the qadi would have to say, whenever you recover from this condition of yours, then you have to have intercourse by way of obligation, or divorce the wife. And the only reason the qadi would not dissolve the marriage right now is because of this medical condition which the husband is suffering. The reason why Allah Jalla wa Ala did not completely abolish this idea of al-Eelaa is because the Eelaa can serve a good purpose. Like we said before, it could serve the purpose of the husband disciplining the wife by way of abandoning her, just as the Prophet did. So it takes something which was already in existence and it simply regulates it. So the Sharia simply says, look, 1 or 2 years is far too much, because then this is going to extremes, because you're taking the rights of the wife away. So we find again in this issue of al-Eelaa that the Sharia adopts a nice middle course. And we find that the concepts of kufr are, when you think about it, to the extremes. And we find then that the Sharia is a deen of justice. It is not a deen of equality. And equality and justice are not two same things. Justice is giving people what they deserve. And Allah Jalla wa Ala is the one who decides what people deserve. The narration mentions that if this oath is less than 4 months, it is not Eelaa, but the point is that it is Eelaa. Eelaa is simply taking this oath not to have intercourse with the wife. The time period does not actually come into play. The only time the time period does come into play, and the time period of 4 months which we are talking about, is that the husband must break the oath if the wife demands that he should return. Otherwise, the Eelaa itself takes place from the time of the actual oath.
Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. What if there is a dispute? She says the iddah of the divorce is finished. Do we accept her claim? Justify your answer. Question number 2. We said that if he divorces her thrice, they can still get back together, but she has to consummate marriage with another man first. But if they have haram sexual intercourse in this second marriage, such as, for example, having intercourse during the Sawm or during the Ihram, then does this intercourse serve to make her halal for the first husband again? Discuss the answer. Question number 3. We mentioned that the ulama say that there are 4 conditions for the Eelaa to be valid. Recall those 4 conditions and also criticize one of the 4 conditions mentioned.